Hey, it's Gerry here. Quick one before we start. Head over to thisishcd.com and create your free account. Join nearly 1,000 members from around the world, add yourself to the map, search transcripts of every episode, discover new ones and check out the journey management course that I teach with my good friend Mark Sticktorn. The link is in the show notes. That's thisishcd.com, helping people design a better world. Now, let's get back to that episode. Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of This Is HCD. My name is Gerry Scullion and I'm a human-centered service design practitioner based in the beautiful city of Dublin, Ireland. Today in the show, I'm delighted to welcome Leisa Reichelt, somebody I've been looking forward to speaking to on the podcast since I set up This Is HCD in 2017. Now, Leisa was one of the early research leaders at the UK's Government Digital Service, the GDS, where she built the research practice behind gov.uk. She then moved home to Australia, and that's where I connected with Leisa, where she was leading research at the Digital Transformation Agency and spent 7 years heading up research and insights at Atlassian, the behemoth, massive software company behind the likes of Jira and Confluence and many, many more. These days, she's back working independently, though, and hosting her own podcast, The School Can't Experience. I'll throw a link to that into the show notes if you want to take a listen. It's fantastic. In this conversation, we dig into what it actually means, what it actually takes to scale research across 3 very different organizations. So it's a fantastic opportunity if you're leading conversations within organizations or actually, overseeing those programs of work as well. And we talk about the golden years of GDS, where there's loads of people there that we would look to in government, like Martin Jordan, maybe Lou Down, Tricia Doyle, lots of people, Sarah Winters, Sarah Richards in GDS as well at the same time. So, and what it's like to pull the handbrake in research in a culture inside a big tech darling like Atlassian, and even when it costs you some friendships. So we get into the nitty gritty of that. Now, before we jump in, there's 3 things that I really want you to listen out for in this conversation that I heard that I think you might be interested in. And there's the first, and it's a really powerful one, is don't negotiate with yourself before you negotiate with them. And what that really means is Leisa was offered the leadership role at GDS, and she wrote down what she actually needed to succeed in that role. Dedicated researchers per team, a regular cadence of testing, all of these things like budgets for participants. She asked for all of it. Now, she knew she wasn't going to get everything, but she got a good chunk of that. And most of us talk ourselves down before we even walk into the room. Okay, that's a really powerful insight from a design leader like Leisa. The second one is the politics is not a distraction from the work. It is the work. The prelude to this conversation was I was messaging Leisa back and forth saying, hey, listen, look, I'm in the final stages of writing This Is Human-Centered Design, the book, which is out next year on Beesh. Fantastic publishers. Hat tip to the folks down in Amsterdam. And I knew Leisa had some gaps. Or had some information that could help me plug in those gaps that I wanted to find more information out. So she was so kind with her time and gave me 2 hours of her time one evening, and we went through everything. But anyway, back to this. Politics is the work. If you want research to change an organization, you have to get into the corporate DNA. The budgets, the resourcing recipes, the program management, all of those different things, the legal conversations. So doing great research isn't enough if it never makes it out of how the organization operates. Now, the third thing is always know your top 3 priorities. Not the top 3 things that you're working on, the top 3 things the organization should be working on. So if someone senior, myself and Leisa were talking about this, if someone senior caught you in the lift, for instance, and asked you what you were working on and and said, right, you talk to your customers all the time. What are the top 3 things you'd be working on in this business if you were in charge? Could you answer that question? Leisa argues researchers need a strong, clear point of view on what the organization should be doing to connect it to the metrics the business cares about and to put skin in the game, because if you've learned 70 things, you've learned nothing. Look, Leisa Reichelt to me is one of the reasons why I kind of leapt into social and government work, 2014, whenever that was for me. And I really, really thank her for her time and her honesty in this conversation. I know if you're in that space, you are going to absolutely love this. I'd go so far and say it's one of the most important conversations that I've had on the podcast. So I know you're going to enjoy it. Let's jump straight in. You know, and I think I said it to you before I left Australia, you're one of my design heroes. Like, you know, you really paved the way for an awful lot of stuff that, you know, I leaned into over the years. So I'm delighted to finally get you on the podcast. When we look back, let me finish. When we look back at our LinkedIn conversation, it goes something like, "Hey Lisa, huge fan. What's going on?" No response. And then it goes to 2017. "Hey Lisa, great seeing you. I'd love to have you in the podcast." And then we were like, I moved away, and now I've finally got you on the podcast. And I'm delighted to have you here. And for people who don't kind of realize who Leisa Reichelt is, I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do currently at the moment.
Oh God, Gerry, I feel so embarrassed after that, but thank you.
No, you shouldn't. Because there's loads of people over the years that the best conversations can take years to happen. So when I have you on,
it's meant to be when it's meant to be, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what do you want to know? What I'm doing now?
Well, I guess what your background, and then also we can talk a little bit more around what you're doing now at the moment.
All right. Well, my background, I've been doing this kind of human-centered work for quite a while.
Yeah.
I didn't train as a designer, and I kind of started working before the internet was really much of a thing. But when I saw that it became a thing, I was immediately attracted to it and thinking, this is what I have to do. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work in that space. I think it just felt very exciting and transformational. Not unlike the world we're in right now, honestly.
Yeah.
And as I got in and explored it to see what I could do, in the old day, they had these roles called producer roles, which were basically everything but the graphic design and the coding.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was some of the coding. And then I guess gradually over time, I kind of like pared away parts of that to get to the bits that I really, really liked. And I ended up with research, predominantly. And so I've been doing research work in different countries, different industries, different spaces for quite a number of years now, and learning a lot along the way.
Yeah. You worked at the GDS. You were one of the early people in the GDS. And then when we first met face to face, was, I think it was we were saying 2014 or 2015, around those years. Both of us suffer from somewhat of an obscure timeline because we're like getting older. And we have to look back at LinkedIn saying, when was that?
What year was that?
Around that time. DTA, and then like Atlassian for the last bulk of years. And now you're on your own, you're independent, which has kind of got a full circle, which we were chatting before, like, you know, when you had your first child, you were freelancing and independent now. So
yeah, I always really kind of considered myself a craft person first and foremost. I had no desire to do management at all. I just really loved doing research work. GDS was the first time that I actually took a management role.
Yeah.
And that was largely because there was such a huge opportunity there for research to be really impactful, but it needed someone to come in and say, here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I thought that might as well be me.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of turned into my thing that I do now, is to try to create these spaces to bring research in to be, you know, as impactful as it can be within organizations.
So that's exactly the foundation for this conversation, folks. Lisa's background, I'm really interested in, you know, kind of getting their perspective on what that looked like in the early days of GDS and then DTA and also Atlassian, and how you scale that. That is a secret sauce. You know, you could do it once, you might get lucky. Do it twice, you know, you're starting to build out a bit more, you know, chance of being able to conduct the look if you want. but doing it 3 times in very different organizations, I'm really keen to understand that a little bit more. Can I take you back to the GDS? Whenever you started there was a precursor to the GDS where Francis had written that letter. His surname, or their surname, should I say, is
Sir Francis Maud.
Francis Maud, yeah. So that had been set up. I think we're agreeing that was probably around 2013-ish, around that time.
I reckon that the first work started like 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
When did I say that I got there? Gonna have to look at LinkedIn again.
2012.
Yeah, 2012.
What did it look like when you were there? Like, was there many people employed at that stage? Was research thing?
So, I have a very untrustworthy memory, so I'll do my best to give you the most honest appraisal I can. But if somebody comes and says that's not right, then they are probably correct. Yeah. There are a few things that I'm sure about. When I started there, they had done the Gov UK Alpha.
Okay.
Which was the prototype of what would ultimately end up being Gov UK.
Yeah.
And it featured a big picture of the London Olympics, which never found its way into production and was apparently never intended to. That was a bit of a crowd pleasing graphic. So I got there. They were working on the Gov UK production model, basically what was going to go out and be used by real people in a real way. And I came in actually to work originally on the identity project as an individual contributor, as a researcher on that program, and the first program in GDS that had its own researcher. Right. So there were 2 or 3 other researchers on staff at that point. And I remember going to their meetings that they'd have each week, and they had a spreadsheet with about 25, 30 projects, and they'd sit there and work out how they would spread each other out across all of these projects and how they would outsource usability testing to different agencies. And that was their kind of big challenge, was like, how do we make it ourselves spread thinly across all of this work?
Yeah.
And I could look at that and pretty quickly go, this is never going to work. This is never going to do the job. And so my real ambition there was to take that huge opportunity that I had in being the only researcher on one program and set up a really great way of working and show how we could make progress against a really tough problem through this way of working in this kind of iterative, very human-centered way that was very involving of the entire team. And I was so fortunate to have other people on the team there before me who were very enthusiastic for this way of working. So I didn't have to force anybody to do this. I kind of got dropped into it. Yeah. So my big opportunity really was, and the other part of the story to this is that prior to me coming into GDS, I had written a blog post, as we used to do in the day, in response to some of GDS's blog posts, talking about how user-centered they were and saying that whilst I believed that they were definitely seeking to do things in the best interest of the user and they were using a lot of user data to guide their thinking, I wasn't sure whether they could really truly call themselves user-centered based on the activities that the teams were doing kind of week after week. I remember Tom Loosemore at one point coming into me and basically saying, well, don't whinge about it, fix it. I was like, okay.
So did Tom Loosemore hire you then, bring you in?
It's kind of, no. It's kind of it's a little bit more complex than that. It was a designer who was working on the program who dobbed me in and said, come and do this.
You'd be a good addition to the team. So can we just talk about that piece where you said that there was going to be people spread across whatever 20, 30 projects? You identified that straight away, saying, look, this isn't going to scale. You mentioned there a second ago. that is a good example of a micro process within the bigger scheme of processes within processes. And you identified that. Can you recall like the steps that you took to kind of change that process so it became much more of an obvious choice to say we actually need more researchers in each one of these projects to increase the chances of success?
I can definitely tell you what happened. I can't
Yeah,
tell
I love
you.
that. Don't have to mention any names.
No. I can't tell you that this will work anywhere else.
I know.
Because that is kind of
contextual to this complex system that was there at that time. And the listeners should know that this is not a recipe for like, Leisa said, if I do this, I'm going to get that. Because again, folks, you should know at this stage, complex problem you cannot understand.
Well, and also, if we do get to talk about this in the multiple different contexts, you'll see that every time, is different, and every time requires a different approach. In this situation, what happened is that I was asked whether or not I would be willing to step into a leadership role for research in the organization. And I had been freelancing for quite a while. I was pretty happy freelancing. And the idea of giving that up to become, working in the public service was not high on my list of things to do at the time. But the team there was fantastic. Like the overall team at GDS was fantastic. And so the opportunity to work with them on such a meaningful problem was pretty attractive. But I set my terms really. And I said, I will do it, but I'm going to want to do things really differently. And you're going to have to support me to do things really differently, or we're not going to do it.
Yeah. I love that.
And so they were like, okay, well, you go away and work out what your terms are and tell me, and we'll go from there. And then the next most important thing that I didn't do was negotiate with myself before I negotiated with them, which I think historically I had done a lot, and I think we do it a lot, where we go, what do we need to make this work? And we look at it and we go, oh, that's too much. They'll never go for that. I better tone it down to something that doesn't look so outrageous. And then you take that in, and then they negotiate you down even further, and then you end up with not enough.
Yeah.
And so in retrospect, I realized that I managed to get myself to not do that. I wrote down what I think I needed, and I went and I asked for that. And I didn't get that, but I got a good chunk of it. And then we're off to go. And the things specifically that I was asking for was around the resource allocation, to say we're not going to do this for people splitting across all of the people, all of the different projects. What we're going to do is we're going to have dedicated researchers per projects. So, we would say this is we're working on, the performance platform was an example, right? We'll have a researcher who's working on that. And they'd have to work at least 3 or 4 days a week on that. And they would also have to be able to do a round of usability testing every 2 weeks with about 5 or 6 people. Yeah. And so we'd have to be able to fund that. So we'd have to put in the budget money to, at that point, we were using external usability labs. This is pre-COVID, when we still got out amongst it with real people.
Well, pre-COVID.
Right. And we'd have to be able to pay for incentives as well, which was a whole other policy thing, but we won't. We might get to that later. Yeah, but that became like a really important thing where I could go, this is the recipe for what we need. We need dedicated resources per team. They need to be able to do this simple format of research at this cadence. So then what that allowed was for this to easily go into a spreadsheet. Because what would happen prior to that is that people would say, oh, we've got a project coming up. Do we need to do any discovery work on this? What do we need? And there'd be some, oh, well, it depends. I need more information. Everything was custom quoted.
Yeah.
And so by the time, it just meant that everything then was fought out. Oh, do we definitely need that? Or what about,
Yeah.
And then, timelines would pass and it wouldn't get into the spreadsheet and it wouldn't get funded. And then the project would start and it was too late. And it was constantly chasing your tail all the time.
You were seen as a bottleneck as well, probably.
It was just hopeless, right? Or somebody would do all the budgeting and they'd forget to talk to you and they go, oh, this project's kicking off next week. Oh, can you help us? No.
And in those scenarios where like projects were kicking off and they forgot to spoke to you, what happened in that instance? Was it a case of like, Leisa says we can't do it because we don't have the research? How did you? Because that doesn't scale. Like that piece doesn't scale, Leisa. Like, where Lisa's, on holidays and then you come back and there's 4 projects that have kind of bolted. You need to have to scale you. And that's the pieces that I'm keen to.
So I guess one thing is, right, the first thing that you do is you build these recipes, right? What are these recipes or these kind of algorithms that people can pick up and they can go and they go, I'm creating a new project. And so therefore I know I'm going to need to budget for one researcher and I'm going to need to budget to do this amount of research, to this format over this period of time. So I can put that money in.
Yeah.
So to try to come up with these little patterns that don't require expertise, right? And so the reality is that for most people,
where do they live? Where do they live, those little recipes? Like, is that something you have to bubble up to, the people who are setting the budgets, to like a framework, if you want, for how projects get stage gate funded? Or like, talk me through that, because the recipe might live at your team level, but does it live at an organizational level is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. So I would say that in that instance, there were 2 main areas where it lived. It lived with the people who were in charge of the program management.
Yeah.
The people who saw the projects coming in and had to work out how to resource for them, how to fit them into the budget. So it was having, good relationships at that program management level, and that'll be called different things in different organizations depending on where you are. The other thing that works effectively in my experience is to say it publicly out loud a lot and say, this is what we do, and kind of create almost like a public accountability. So
100%. I love that.
Yeah. In GDS was a big blogging organization, right? And I very actively worked with my team to write things down and publish them and get them out there, because that did 2 things, right? In this particular context, we had what were we trying to do within GDS? But GDS is just like one tiny part of the overall government. 100%. So if we could publish this and say, this is how we're doing it, then other people in other departments can look at that and go, right, well, that's what they're doing. That gives us a license then to go, we should be doing that too. That's what we're going to do.
Before we move on in this conversation, I want to go back to that piece, and I'm sure some communications and PR people were probably freaking out when GDS had the power to be able to blog. And was there a piece around that where suddenly Lisa's like, screw it, we're going to blog about this stuff, we're going to say these things? Was there an approval process before you posted these things out? Because that, when you look at it from a risk perspective, you could be putting somebody on the hook for some of these things. How did that work?
So again, GDS was a bit of a special beast.
Yeah.
And that culture was very much there before I was there. And so I just kind of hooked into that. Yeah. There was a amazing communications team at GDS at the time who were fantastic at helping publish great blogs out, that shared what we were doing precisely for the same purpose. Like, it wasn't just research that was doing this. It was all parts of the organization who were trying to share out what their process was and how they were working so that could be picked up and be used as a model. But, in practice, the way that it worked was that there was a central GDS blog, but then different projects and different capabilities would also have their own blog as well. So occasionally we would blog on the big GDS blog, but we also had like a research.gds.gov.uk blog as well, right? And we could blog pretty much whatever we wanted there. Yeah. There were certainly lines that you could cross and get in trouble for, but there wasn't really any great incentive to do that.
Absolutely. This was the days of Twitter as well, I remember, like where it was content was flying out into Twitter and it was being retweeted. It would get out very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic.
The golden years, yeah.
We call it the golden years when we look back at it. Like, basically, there's a few things that I'm really interested in. And as I'm writing the book at the moment, so like I'm writing it pretty much out loud, if you want. I argue in the book that the politics you meet in organizations is not a distraction from the work. It is actually the work. And what you were talking about there, about that process you identified and being able to navigate that, I'm sure from listening to you now that Monday to Friday, you weren't on the tools as much as you were before when you were working independent. You are now navigating a whole other kind of ecosystem and a new skill that had to be cultivated. How does that statement make you feel about it being not a distraction from the work? It is the work. Is that something that you feel is, you could see yourself, or maybe it could be improved?
I don't know if I can improve it, but I think that you're definitely correct. I think that you need to, part of the reason that I moved into doing management work rather than being on the tools all the time was precisely because I had done so much research work. And like I when I was living and working in London, I kind of stayed there long enough to get briefed by the same organization with the same research brief.
Okay.
Right. And you realize that whilst it was a fun project and I'd be happy to do it twice, I was kind of getting to that stage of my life where I'm like, you know what? This is not actually making any difference in the world at all.
Okay.
And in order to really make that difference, you have to get into the corporate DNA. You have to change the way that the organization thinks about who it is and what it does. And a certain part of that is done by doing the work and doing it really well and doing it very collaboratively and doing it very openly. But a lot more, at least an equal amount, I think, is about really understanding how that business operates and trying to get into the operational structures so that, things like budgeting become easy for resource allocation, things like incentivizing participants, like going through that whole, legal policy issue, was like, for a long time, was just be like, the rules say you can't do it. And it's like, okay, well, show me the rules where it says that.
Yeah.
And then like really digging into just really mundane operational things. Lots and lots and lots of conversations with lawyers.
Yeah.
About what's risk and what's not risk.
But when you were there, GDS was almost seen as a standalone thing. Well, it was kind of, if you want, like a shared service, wasn't it? It was like people were bringing problems in from respective parts of the government, whereas now it's much more absorbed into the government structure and the fabric itself.
That was always the goal, right? So GDS had what they called transformation projects, where each department would have one or two transactional projects that it would bring in, and that department and GDS would work together on that. And that was like kind of like a little bit of a sort of a hothouse situation where those practices and ways of working and all capabilities would start to go by osmosis from GDS kind of out into the organization. But still within the organizations, I worked with a lot of folk who were working very hard to build this up within their own organizations as well. So like folks at the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office and HMRC, lots of places where I was working closely with folk who were really trying to get this up and running in their organizations as well. I would say in often much more difficult political terrains.
100%. What did it look like in terms of the conditions for GDS accepting those projects? Was it a condition of like, you need to be at a certain level, if you want, in the design maturity in order for us to be able to be effectively engaged? Or was it a case of like, basket case A has arrived on the doorstep, we need to try and figure this one out?
All of this actually happened before my time, Gerry. So there were 25. They agreed to do 25 transformation projects. I'm pretty sure what happened was it got divided up across a range of different departments, and those departments were able to nominate transactions that they wanted to do as transformation projects. And then probably between GDS and the department, they decided whether or not it was a good case or not a good case. But that was kind of part of that sort of big program of work. So it wasn't like an ongoing thing. It was like, there's 25, we're going to execute 25. And then, like ultimately, like the fourth part of the remit was always go wholesale, right? Which is that acknowledgement that it was never all going to happen out of GDS, that it had to happen, across all of the organization and also more widely out into the ecosystem of suppliers and partners as well.
Yeah, 100%. If you imagine...
Sorry, can I just say one other thing, which I think is very unique to GDS and to the London context specifically, is that there are few places on earth where you will have access to such a rich talent pool than London. There are a few places in the US, but there are very other few places in the world. And so part of my strategy there very much was like hiring in some of the best talent that I could find, because then, the goal was lots of public servants, or what are they called? Civil servants in the UK, wanted to get on board and start to learn how to do this research work, right? So we could bring in from the outside very experienced and talented people who could then start to, train up and mentor and support a big group of people who were very keen, often had a lot of good public sector background, but not necessarily human-centered design background. And so that was a strategy that played very well in that context. Didn't play so well in Sydney.
Yeah, it was harder in Sydney, which we're going to come to now in a second. But just going back
but also, sorry, even in the UK, when we had to go up north and like build teams in Newcastle, again, like very like so the same playbook, as you were saying, is not going to work the same everywhere. You're going to come up with challenges, and you're always going to have to come up with new ways to try to work out how do we do this.
Can I just ask you on that piece? You said like going out and looking for the best talent. There's a common thread between all of the people I know ex GDS is in that they're all absolutely cool people to hang out with. Okay, like they seems to be a very similar ethos that's deep within the person. Okay, and I can't say for absolutely everybody, but generally speaking, the people who I do know, there was a really good casting agent to the movie, if you want. What was that like? How did you do it? That's the secret sauce for me, is building the team that can actually live and breathe any of these little processes that we're talking about here, these rituals. So, and that's what we're going to come on to next, about how this scales. Can you just talk to me about how you ensured that was actually followed through at a research level or a recruitment level?
Yeah, well, I guess the two things, right? Again, there was a lot of culture and values in place already before I got there, which was part of the reason why I was attracted to be going there, right? And so you had very meaningful work. You had very talented people to work with, but there was that commitment to serving, the user. Yeah. As we call them at the time, like that really truly putting user needs first. And that was like the number one item on everyone's agenda. That's going to attract a certain type of person. But then the other thing I think is the way of working was always very, very cross-functional, very collaborative, very transparent. Yeah. And so I think when you are working that way, you kind of have to leave your ego at the door a fair bit, right? Because and you're working on really hard problems, and and it's like proper universal design, which is super hard. And so I think there is something about that sort of that kind of egoless way of working
Yeah.
And that willingness to be wrong and to learn, and that is it's very attractive to a certain kind of person. I think that's the sort of person that you would get there, right? And if you weren't happy to work that way, then you wouldn't
you wouldn't cut it.
No, you wouldn't want to come and do it, right? There are some people for whom that would be a complete nightmare. But I think we really sort of wore our heart on our sleeves in respect to like what the values were and what the ways of working were. So if you saw that and you thought, that sounds delicious, I really want some of that, you would run for it, right? Whereas I think other people would like quietly go, couldn't think of anything worse, and they kept to themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, if you imagine that I was in Sydney and we were sitting down in a pub, and we were probably a little bit older than we are now, well, a good bit older, because this is kind of a retrospective question. But if we're looking at the fact that GDS has now outlasted several changes and several kind of leadership changes, lots of prime minister changes in the UK over the last decade, not just you, but generally speaking, that sort of early version of the GDS has managed to successfully outlast a lot of those different pieces. What do you think were the key ingredients, other than the people that sit around that? Like, the people is a huge part of it, we've just covered. Can you think of other aspects that really led to its success? Because it has been an incredibly successful kind of initiative for the UK government.
I think, again, we've covered a little bit of this already. The fact that a lot of it was distilled down to clear beliefs, right?
Yeah.
So you had like the design principles, you had the service manual, that was here's how we do things, was written down. There was no secret sauce, right? It was all there and distilled down and readable by anybody who wanted to read it. Very accessible. It wasn't overly complex. Like, things were kept as simple as they could be, in terms of the user interface, but also in terms of the ways of working, right? We didn't overcomplicate things. We kept it as simple and repeatable as possible. And then there's things like the infrastructure. So things like the design system were massive in terms of being able to help
scale.
Make it easy for teams who hadn't done this stuff before to like get to a good place quickly. And there was a nice partnership, I think, as well, that the design system created between developers, designers, researchers, probably others as well, right? This was a place to kind of coalesce on, here's how we're going to do things, here's why we're going to do it, here's what we've learned. And again, for that to be very kind of accessible and readable and understandable to anybody who wanted it as well. But I think, taking that time to think about, well, what do we believe? How do we work? And to make it as clear and as simple as possible and communicable as possible.
Yeah. It's a huge thing. So the communications team and the content design team, Sarah Richards / Winters, Henrik, all of those people that were there at those stages, setting the foundations up is kind of one of the key reasons I can see for its success.
Definitely. I think there were also people like Ben Terra and Russell Davies who were kind of at that senior leadership role, right? And just like putting stuff on posters.
Yeah.
Just like posters that in a half dozen words set out a clear belief, and we're just like pinned up in places. Like we had our research as a team sport poster, and anytime I went out to a department, I would just like bring the poster with me and go, where can we hang this up?
I mean, just as you're saying that, some of the phrases I have nicked are from you. As you're saying, show the thing. Like,
that was Russell. That wasn't me. That's Russell.
Oh, okay. Well,
but they're all, but they're designed to be nicked. That's exactly the thing, right? They're designed to be nicked, and success was when you saw somebody else saying it. It wasn't like, oh, they're saying my thing without saying it's my thing, right? Yeah. It's like every time I hear somebody say research is a team sport, I'm just like, And I bet Russell, every time Russell hears somebody say, show the thing, he has a quiet little chuckle and does a little, it's great. That's exactly the point.
So one of the things that I'm keen to get your perspective on is GDS was set up, okay? And Sir Francis Mudge he wrote that letter and it got executive buy-in. But then prime ministers changed and executive sponsors moved on. What did that look like? Because in private sectors, whenever the sponsor sets something like this up and then they move on, it creates an unwavering within those teams and that kind of function. And then people are second guessing it and it kind of takes it a couple of steps back. And then if it happens again in quick succession where there might be a bounce of a leadership, then it's a case of like, okay, now we're a threat and then we're going to be killed. So can you remember what that was like and maybe give some thought and perspective on how that managed to succeed? Because I don't know if you read the news, but the UK government going through a fair amount of PMs at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really there for that much time that I could tell you. I think,
but Lisa, you were there in Sydney whenever the DTA was shifting, wasn't it? There was a couple of PMs.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly seen changes, right? I think, you could say one of the reasons that I think GDS was so successful was because of Sir Francis Mudge and because of where he was in his career, right? He was a very senior politician who was late in his career and had no desire to be the PM.
Yeah.
And so he just did the right thing.
Yeah.
And he was like the guardian angel, but with a big sword, not like a metaphorical sword, not a real one. All right. Like really defending GDS often. Right. And Absolutely. Then GDS also had a layer of leadership who were very bold in the way that they set out as well, right? And so what happens then is that layer of leadership moves on and Francis Mudge moves on and new people come in, and it all comes down to whether or not the people who come in really understand why we're doing it the way that we're doing it, which is often a very different way to what they have experienced before. And whether or not and then kind of two things can happen off the back of that, right? They can either go, I just completely reject this premise and go in a completely different direction, which, is painful. But then the other thing that kind of feels less painful at first, but maybe might still be awful, right? Is when they keep doing the motions, but don't really get the why. Yeah. And I think that's when you get this sort of drift from purpose, which is probably the thing that I like. When I talk to folk who are working in government space in the UK now, I think that's what I sense is this drift where a lot of the same motions are there, but I sometimes don't feel entirely confident that people are aligned to the why as to why we're doing it.
So was that a case of like, at every opportunity, you mentioned hanging posters and really hammering that home, that why piece? This is why we're doing it. And maybe surfacing anecdotal evidence of the impact of the work. Is it that kind of flavor?
I think
of
so. Yeah. And I think that's kind of, I would like to think that's been a hallmark of how I always work, right? Which is like if folks are going to challenge me on what we're doing, I want you to challenge me at the principle basis. This is what I'm trying to achieve. This is why I'm doing this. So if there's so either you go, well, I fundamentally don't agree with what you're trying to achieve, or I think there's a better way that you can achieve what you're trying to achieve. They're like kind of two different questions. Yeah. And I think it's super important to make sure you know which one you're talking about. Yeah. And for me, it's like if you've got, like, let's assume that most of the people that we work with are pretty smart. Yeah. If they understand the why, if you get the principles, then you can give people a lot of flexibility to achieve that however they want to. But if they're just following the pattern without understanding the why, then I think, and this is where like there's a little bit of a conflict between what I said at the beginning and what I'm saying now, right? And one of the other things that the whole premise of this at the beginning, Gerry, for you was you said, well, how do you scale this?
How do you scale it?
And actually, like I made a little note at the time. I'm just like, is the goal scale? I actually think sometimes we go, how do I scale this? And scale, particularly now, right, in this whole AI blah blah, world. I think it's really, maybe we need to talk more about impact. Like, how do we get the impact?
And I mean,
because we can get scale, and then you have all of these people doing all of this stuff and still not achieving anything. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, scale can be, not the right kind of metric because, as you said, people can be doing the thing and not delivering the impact. So that is a really good point. I just want to pick up on something that you said there a second ago around, Sir Francis Mudd, they champion things. And that was one of the key kind of pieces that set it in motion. Malcolm Turnbull did something similar in Australia where he stood and he presented, and the DTA, or it wasn't called the DTA.
It was the DTO originally.
I remember, yeah. The DTO was created, the Digital Transformation Office. And I remember at that time I was sitting in the Downing Centre. I remember here and I was like, Turnbull's after talking about this. And I was like, oh, fantastic. I mean, on paper, you look at that, Malcolm Turnbull, an impressive business person, he was a pretty shrewd person to try and get behind the DTO at the time. But yet, if we're to be totally brutally honest, I mean, 10, 12 years later, it probably hasn't seen the same level of impact as the GDS had. Listen, don't laugh.
That's understating things somewhat, I think, Gerry.
No, well, I think I've got a future on TV. I want to try and be political here a little bit. That's a joke, by the way. I have definitely no ambitions to be on TV. But what was the difference there? So when Malcolm Turnbull left, there was more repercussions at the DTO to the DTA. Can you comment on that?
What can I say? I left GDS to come back to Australia to work at the DTO. And part of the reason that I was optimistic about it was because Turnbull was the Minister for Communications, and he was the guy who was leading the charge on this. He'd had a lot of conversations with folks in the UK. And I was reasonably confident that they knew what they were going to do. I was like literally getting on the plane to move my family back from London to Sydney when the Tony Abbott Turnbull spill was occurring.
Okay, and really?
Yeah, I got off the plane. I got on the plane to Tony Abbott PM and off the plane to Turnbull being the PM. Yeah. And you can't do something like this as a prime minister.
Yeah, I do remember this. So I'm looking back at, Tony
right?
Abbott.
Yeah. So, weirdly, if Tony Abbott had stayed as the Prime Minister and Turnbull had stayed as the Minister for Communications, maybe we would have been more successful. And, and I know he continued to care about it a lot and was as involved as he could be. But he had a lot of stuff going on. And
Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull?
Turnbull.
Yeah. 100%.
Right? There was a lot going on, and there was no way that he was able to give this the time and attention that it needed in amongst all the other stuff that was going on. And so I think, we lost our Francis Mudd kind of before we got started, because like the DTO existed, before I got there.
I remember meeting you in the DTO at that point, and there was a bit of a flap because, not with you, but just generally with the government at that stage, because Tony Abbott, it's probably safe to assume, and I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of somebody else, but he may not think the same as Malcolm Turnbull when it comes to that kind of stuff. So he's very much on the right, Tony Abbott. And I'll tell you a funny story about Tony Abbott. We lived in in his constituency in Sydney, and we had our first child, and he'd gone through all of the stuff that he'd done, and he came out and he saw a photo opportunity with myself, my wife, and my newborn baby, and I was very proud to tell him to GTF away. So he's just not somebody I would ever want to align, and unfortunately, he hung around for a while. Like, I'm just looking, he was nearly 2 years sitting around at that role at that stage. So
you'll be pleased to know he's back being the president of the Liberal Party again now. So
is he? I'm just looking to see. I've kind of disconnected a little bit. I don't look at that side of politics in Australia. I should do.
Stunned to hear that, Gerry. Yeah. Anyway, so enough of that.
What does that mean, though? Like when he came in, like Tony Abbott came in, like was the DTO?
No, Abbott was in already, right? So the point here is that when I came to do this job,
you'd Abbott.
When I agreed to do it, Abbott was the PM, but Turnbull was Minister for Communications, and this was his baby, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So this was like a big fish in his pond, but then he became the Prime Minister. All of a sudden, we were like a fingerling. Like, we were nothing in the scheme of things for him. And so we then got a new minister to look after us, and then another minister and another minister. We ended up with all of these junior ministers coming in and being responsible, none of whom really got it or cared about it in the same way that Turnbull, who had sort of initiated this whole piece, did, right? So we didn't have that very senior leadership. We didn't have that sort of government representative who like really got the principles of what we were trying to do.
So that why was missing. If you go back to the GDS, like the why we're doing this, or was it a case of it was poorly structured from the outset?
My belief is, and other people will probably say different things potentially. My belief is that at that political level, that political leadership level, the why graduated with Turnbull and was never really brought back in. We didn't really ever have political leadership that got the why ever again, I don't think.
But when you look at it on paper, like, Turnbull moving from communications minister to PM, you'd imagine it's going to get greater clout. On paper, like you'd imagine that was the case, but unfortunately,
you might think that, but no, it's not, because he then becomes occupied with so many things. He has all the best will in the world, but no time and attention, and he then can't spend his political capital on something, as I'm going to say, relatively inconsequential compared to some of the other big ticket things that he was dealing with.
Absolutely, terrorism and everything. It was a pretty difficult time. Yeah, it was a difficult time. So again, if we were to compare, and again, we're not doing like for like, but if you look at the GDS and you look at the DTO/DTA, is it a case of it was just the wrong time in Australia? Well, what am I hearing there? How do you?
There's lots of things, right? So I think, yes, we didn't have that political leader in the same way that we had in the UK. I think also being not the first iteration is a very different kind of situation as well, right? Yeah. So you remember when Spotify did their whole, like, here's how we work, here's our way of working, and suddenly everyone was like, oh, we're going to do the Spotify model, and then some people were like, bloody Spotify model, don't even talk to me about a Spotify model. So it was a little bit like that when all a bunch of us came in. I am Australian, I was born here. But I got off the plane with my accent that I developed from living in London for a long time, with a bunch of other people who were British, and a lot of the public sector who were involved in this were just like, can you just get on your plane and fuck off? Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
Absolutely. There was a young person who was like
Jordan Hatch.
I remember Jordan Hatch. I remember that name being, I was like, oh my God, they've brought the best of the best over from. But there was also a sub-conversation, a sub-narrative that was going through, because I was at the local level, if you want, like New South Wales. And they were saying, oh, they're just going to do a lift and shift. And it was this whole piece that, like, it's not contextual, it's not understanding the differences and the nuances, because there's a lot more, and I say that with conviction, like, nuances in Australia around, identity and our colonial past and how we actually, deliver our services, so it's contextual to, the indigenous peoples of Australia, like all of those different pieces. And it wasn't, I remember at the time, it wasn't communicated particularly well on how that was going to be approached. I remember speaking to the New Zealand equivalent, and they just seemed to be much more ethically grounded. I hope that's not being offensive, but they just seem to be more conditioned to thinking about the other. Is that something that maybe I've tainted a little bit in my memory, or is that something you can comment on?
I can only tell you my experience, really, Gerry, which is that I feel as though a lot of people had made a lot of decisions before anything got started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps on both sides, right? Certainly when I was there, it was like a lot of folk just going, you don't know what you're talking about. This is fundamentally different. What worked there will not work here.
Yeah.
We're fine as we are. Leave us, right? And I mean, I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, and maybe I haven't learned my lesson, right? At the same time, I go, well, it is simple, right? Because no matter where we are, whether it's UK, Australia, US, New Zealand, right? What do? We start with user needs.
Yeah.
All right. And we go and we find out who are the users. What do they need to do? What do we need to do to make that a good experience?
Yeah.
I do believe that is the same everywhere.
Yeah.
But I also believe that that what those needs will be and how we design to meet those needs will be different everywhere.
Absolutely.
And I think that just got like lost. We were never able really to communicate because I don't really feel like folk were listening, and maybe more could have been done in terms of communicating, almost certainly. But
it was communication outwards. It was more like not about the ways of working, but I think in the local scene, it seemed to be like, well, they didn't even ask at that point. Like, there were some really solid, amazing people in Sydney, and they still are, like, that would have been an amazing internal hire to come in through that. And it was seen as okay, well, maybe we're not good enough. They've gone over and they've taken the GDS across. And again, I'm not having you were Australian, as you said, you were born in Australia. But there was also, a leadership from another country at that stage, like the US. And it was a case of like, well, we didn't feel like it was connected to the system in that sense. It was kind of like the UFOs just landed in amongst a lot of the work that had been tried before. So yeah, again, hopefully I wasn't setting out to offend, but it was just, remember being how it was perceived at the time. I think it was more of a communications thing as opposed to actually how the actual work was happening. Because when I was over the TTA, whatever it was called, it was the work was great. It was, at that time, it was very positive, and I know everyone, myself included, wanted to work there. It was a case of like, oh man, if the job comes up and I'm working alongside Leisa and everyone else, I am gone from here. I remember saying that to everyone.
Yeah, but Gerry, like, we don't, like, that's not what we want, right? We want amazing people to stay out in the departments because that's where the bulk of the work has to happen, right? And so the whole, the goal is to get that great, unified framework and anyway. What could have been? What could have been?
But go all the way back to that piece of the politics is the work. Is that still holding true if we're looking at that statement into the time where you're in the DTA and the DTO? The politics, it sounds like at that stage you get off the plane and you're like, hey, there's Bondi. And oh my God, what's that in the distance? This is going to be, I'm going to be working night and day.
Yeah,
a lot of politics at that point. Yeah.
Definitely. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to. I want to be. I kind of want to be. I think The reality in a lot of the context that many of us will be working in is that you will come into situations where there are entrenched power systems that people are very happy with. And some of the things that you are going to maybe suggest should happen are going to like mess with that.
Yeah.
And people will do whatever they need to do to shut that down to maintain their own power systems. And it's kind of naive, I guess, to think that that's not the case. I was a lot more naive back then than I am now, let's say. But I think there was a lot of that going on as well.
So if you look
that was back at the same time as Robodebt was going on too, right? So that was, it was a pretty interesting time.
I remember GDS, the DTA, DTO, and then I came home to Ireland, and then you were at Atlassian. Okay, so what were the two pieces? Atlassian, for anyone who doesn't know, by the way, is an absolute powerhouse of an Australian success story. It started out as a startup, went on to become a massive enterprise. I don't know what its current valuation is in the ASX, but it's definitely still in the billions, I presume.
It's on the NASDAQ, actually, but yeah. It's
on the NASDAQ, okay, right. So thanks for qualifying and picking me up on that. But like a huge success story. So you joined there 2018, was it 2017 or something around that era?
Something like that. Something like that, yeah.
You were there for 7 years. Walk me through what are the pieces that, when you started that role, what did you draw upon from your experience in the DTA? And how did that differ, the two different worlds? You were coming from a public organization and you're dealing with, trying to improve public services into a absolutely huge organization in Atlassian. What was that like, that transition?
Well, I actually don't think that Atlassian was bigger than the public service at that point.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I suppose if you look at the scale of the employees in,
it's grown a lot. It's grown a lot over the years. It was funny when I first started at Atlassian. Everyone was just like, "Oh, it must be such a relief to be working in a tech company. It must be so much easier than it is working in government." I think I don't know why I guess that was just the impression that things are harder to do in government than they are in tech companies. But that was not necessarily my experience. And I think that there were a couple of things that stand out to me, particularly around that. One was that in big corporates and in government, there is a lot of bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy is very legible. Again, like going back to like someone's written it down and you can find it and you can follow it and you know what needs to get done in order, if you want to do a procurement, there are rules, they're written down, you follow the rules. In more of a sort of a tech startup world, a lot of the time, certainly my experience was that the bureaucracy still existed, but it was a lot less legible. It was hard. Okay. You had to like find the person who knew the thing, who could unlock the door to get the thing done. And so that just like navigating your way around the system was a lot more difficult.
Isn't that like kind of like, it's kind of meta in its sense, because Jira and Confluence are the two places and the two softwares that Atlassian create.
I think it's more cultural. Yeah, I think it's more cultural. I think it was because the mindset of the place was still very much startup mindset.
Yeah.
We don't mess around with things like procurement. We just like get stuff done. But like, actually, that wasn't the reality. Actually, there was a procurement process, and somebody knew what it was, but most people were just like, I just put it on my credit card.
Is it a case that in government there was like a knowing culture and then trying to move them into a learning culture? That shift is a big thing for me when you're trying to, we actually don't know because we need to go and ask. We have to do the research and trying to find out the answers to some of these questions. Presumably, and again, assumption flag being waved here, at Atlassian, they already had design. They already had design research. I know Ben Crothers was there for a long time. There's a lot of great people that I've known over the years being in Australia. Atlassian is synonymous with the design community. A lot of the meetups are met there. So design was presumably more mature at that point when you arrived in, because it had been around for coming up to 10 years, I'd say. What were the challenges that you were facing when you went into Atlassian, and what was your task? What was you set out your agenda way back in the GDS about these are my negotiables and my non-negotiables. This is what I want to be able to do. Can you talk about what that was like from your perspective of going into Atlassian?
I think that one really significant difference, and you kind of touched on this, I think, in your, what was it, your knowing culture
to learning culture.
Yeah. So my experience in government and in some of the different organizations that I've worked in as well, was that they were like, I'd come in, hi, I'm Lisa, I do UX research. And they're like, you do what now?
Really?
UX research. Oh, what's that when it's at home? And you explain it, and then so your job becomes to help them understand what you do and why it might be a valuable thing for you to do with them. And then they go, all right, okay, you've convinced me. Off you go now, do the thing. Right? And then you have the space to go do the thing.
Yeah.
Going into Atlassian was very different because, as you say, there was quite a mature culture there, a mature design culture. I'm going to say not a mature research culture.
Okay. Yeah. I would see that.
We were talking about consent earlier, I think, before we started recording, right? Informed consent.
Yeah.
There was, when I got started at Atlassian, there were no consent forms for research. Yeah. There were non-disclosure forms.
Yeah, okay.
But there were no consent forms. That whole conversation around consent being something that was there to like look after our research participants was not a conversation that was happening. It was like, we have to protect ourselves from our research participants who might see our amazing designs and go and tell the world about them before we launch it.
The imbalance was there.
Yeah. So there was a lot of stuff happening and a lot of people who, there was a lot of stuff happening and a general sense that we're pretty happy with what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, they were growing like bananas. Like there was.
Yeah.
How do you work within that, like delivering value whenever everything is going great and maybe you're not doing research pretty well?
Gerry.
I'm asking the questions.
I know, but I've made a New Year's resolution to try not to lose more friends, and you're about to make me lose more friends, probably.
Sorry,
it wasn't going great.
Yeah.
It wasn't going great, right? The research work that was being done there, I think, was done with great intention.
Yeah.
But was providing a lot of false positives where they'd done a lot of work and they had a lot of data and they were like, this demonstrates that we should do this. And, you know, I remember having a chat to a really good researcher who had been hired there not long before me. And she's like, please, can you have a look at this project? I don't know if I've just missed something really important in my research career or if this is just like a completely bonkers way to solve this problem. And I just looked at us. I've never seen anything like this in my life. But, you know, and this is kind of the thing. Like you go into these organizations that have a very specific way of doing things and a level of confidence and pride in themselves for doing it that way. And you come in and the first thing that you're doing is like, did I miss a really important part in my career that like you question yourself, right? You're like, yeah, you know, is it me? And so, you know, that and then like being able to reset that without completely pissing everybody off who has invested a lot in that. Like I will be completely frank with you and say I did piss off a lot of people who had invested a lot in that. And, you know, to this day, it's like they would cross the street not to come talk to me, I think, because I probably could have handled that situation a lot better than I did.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I still don't know how I would have handled that differently, because
Yeah.
it sort of did need a handbrake turn.
But
And I
that is
don't know
you.
how you can do a handbrake turn without
Yeah.
the people who have set it up in the direction not
Yeah.
feeling as though you're kind of shitting all over them.
But I think, aren't these the moments though in your career, Leisa, where you have to have an internal compass of yourself of what's the right thing to do? And that's what I've heard, from you speak, from you write. This is Leisa. This is who they are. Like, if there's, I'm working towards these principles here. You know what I mean? I will do and say what I have to say to try and reset that course.
Yeah.
And, you can say, I probably could have handled it better. Yeah. Who couldn't have done something better? Like, it's easier to say in retrospect. But at that moment in time, I'm sure it was difficult personally, professionally, and going into work and you're saying, well, look, I think we've been doing not exactly a great job in certain parts here. We can improve these things. You might have lost people on the way, but I'm sure over time it might have got a little bit easier, did it?
Eventually.
Can you talk to that? Yeah.
Yeah, eventually. But you're right. It is, I think you need to make a decision as to what your priorities are. My priorities were to do the job the right way, to do the best, what I believed was the best thing for the company. And the best thing for which I believe is doing the best thing for, our customers and our users.
That's the hard work.
Right? Yeah. And so it was, like I did not approach this like a popularity contest. And it was really, really hard. And, for a long time. And, I think that actually this is kind of in a lot of cases, it is what you choose when you choose to be a researcher.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly telling people stuff that they don't want to hear. And trying to find ways to get them to embrace that, right? And change directions off the back of that. And so, I don't think you become a researcher and be a good researcher if you want to be the most popular person in the organization.
I love that. I love that because that's the stuff you don't talk about.
I think
No, but it's so important to say it out loud, and I can even feel you saying to yourself, "Oh my God, should I say that?" But like at the same point, that is so true. And in my cases, I hear a lot of that coming through from lots of people I coach. It's not a popularity contest. We're here to bring the hard truth back, and hopefully they accept it. And going to bed each night, you can put your head in your pillow and say, "Well, I'm walking the walk and I'm talking the talk."
It's really interesting though, because I reflect, there are certain people who I've come across in my career who have not chosen that path, right?
Yeah.
Who have been extremely popular with their stakeholders, with people that they do the work for, and who get fabulous feedback. Oh, you're so great. You're doing wonderful work, but I am aware that they're
probably in the toilet.
They're not doing what they should. They're not having the hard conversations, right? They're sugarcoating everything. But God, do they have a great time getting invited to all the parties?
I'll just, on that point, I do remember being in a government department in Australia and starting out like, "Hey, Gerry, what's going on?" To then being found out that they just referred to me, "Where is Scullion today?" it was a case of like it had shifted so dramatically when I started bringing back the real research and writing these things down, so it was clearly understood. And I speak about that in the book. I speak about this like this is not going to mean that you're going to have the happiest of Monday mornings when you're working in organizations. But I mean, the bulk of your work, if you look at it now, how would you, is it something you're proud of, or how do you see it from your own perspective? You said that there was things that you probably could have done better, removing out of that, but would you be generally positive about your career that you've achieved so far?
I'm not the person to say that,
Come on.
Gerry. No,
I'm a fan, so
yeah, I know. Do you know, before we get to that though, I do want to say one thing, right? Because
yeah.
I don't think that it's okay that we go, oh, it's hard being a researcher. You always say sad things. People don't like you, blah, blah. I think, to go back to like how if you want to be impactful, if you want to create change, then the worst thing that can happen is that you don't get invited to the meetings.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not acceptable. It's not okay to go, well, nobody likes me because I say mean things because the research says mean things and therefore, right. And like, what can I do? That can't be the end of the story. Like we have to, I think part of the big challenge is, how do we turn it around? How do we get into the mindset of the folks who we're trying to share this with and be really a part of that? And this is why, I think, going back to GDS, something that worked very well there, right, is that you weren't the outsider, right? It was the team working together, right? The unit of delivery was the team, to go back to another thing that was on a poster, right? And so the team would come up with the prototype and how they thought the solutions would work. And the team would go and watch the research, and the team would work out what they'd learned, and then, round and round we'd go. And, I think that was what I was always trying to push more and more towards, was like, how can we get our research folk in as a genuine part of that cross-disciplinary team where we all have skin in the game.
Yeah.
Where I'm not having to wag my finger at anybody. But when you're at that strategic level and you're going, there's this whole bit of work over here that needs to happen that you've got no one on. And it's not the sexy, glamorous work.
Yeah.
Right? It's the hard work. It's the making Jira easier to use work. Right? I think that's where it's super hard, is to try to get the resourcing into areas where no one really particularly wants to do it because it's not super fun.
So is it a case of being an agitator while still maintaining the status quo? And you're getting
I don't think I want to go with the agitator thing, right? I think for me, it's really about like, how do you connect it to the business? Yeah. How do you try to talk about this in terms that the business cares about, to say, it's all, you almost take a lot of the user talk out of it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, we need to go and fix this up over here because this is having a real impact on the onboarding effectiveness, which is impacting this metric and this metric and this metric, which are the metrics that, I am willing to make a bet that if we do these things here, it's going to have this influence on those metrics, right? And then I have my skin in the game.
Yeah.
So that I can be right or wrong. I can be provably right or wrong against business metrics that the organization actually cares about. I think that there's a lot of that, right? It's like, how do you make sure that you have skin in the game so that you can be held accountable and you're not just someone who's over in the corner having a moan?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to distill in that. Like, I still feel like the agitation piece is, if you're not agitating, you have to question, are you being complicit in actually how you're doing things? Like, and agitation doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be, you're reverberating a little bit more at a higher frequency to try and allow people to, kind of rethink and reflect on actually how they're doing these things.
Can I reframe that?
Yeah, please do. This is a collaboration.
So I was talking to someone about this the other day, right? They have this huge, big amount of data. It's all wonderful data. And like they've learned about 70 different things. And I'm like, if you've learned 70 things, you've learned nothing, because no business can absorb 70 things at once. Absolutely. I'm like, if you got caught in the lift with the CEO tomorrow and they said, right, mate, what should I be working on? Like, do you have your top 3 things? Yeah. And I think that's where I got to, was I want to have an opinion on what are the top 3 things that I would do if I was the boss. So if I get in the lift with the CEO and they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? We're just going to do some planning, or I'm thinking about this. Like, what do you think are the important things? Like, I know my top 3 things immediately off the top of my head. Yeah. And that they've come from the body of work that the research team have done. and that they maybe are aligned to things that the business is interested in doing, or maybe they're going to go off in a completely different direction. But I have those prepared and ready to go, right? And I would have my Confluence pages all there and ready. So, if I got the chance and they were like, oh, can you send me some stuff on that? Boom.
Done.
You got it, right? It's all I basically got the proposal for the idea there already with all of my kind of sources and recommendations. So I have something that's very legible, that's and is opinionable, is like opinionated. I think it's really important that we are specifically opinionated and we can talk about why from a business point of view. Why does this matter? Because my top 3 things should be, what are the top 3 things that I want to recommend that we do that's going to have like an impact on the bottom line, on the metrics that the business cares about? And so that's kind of agitating, but I think it's like productive agitating.
Yeah. Positive agitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, is probably a way of kind of, I love the anecdote of what you're talking about. It's not agitating for just sitting there being kind of like, this is all, we can do better than this. It's, you're actually putting action around it. And I think that's a really nice way of framing it. Leisa.
And you make it concrete, right? You make it concrete and you make it debatable.
100%. 100%. I am conscious I've taken so much of your time in your night. It's
so fun though, Gerry.
In your nighttime. I mean, this is why I podcast. I know you are now a podcaster, and I want you to give a shout out to your podcast. We've been connecting folks the last week about just how amazing it is to podcast, because this is how I speak to my friends. This is how I speak to everyone else. What you hear is what you get. But what's your experience, and tell us about your own podcast that you're working on at the moment.
Well, when I left Atlassian, I left for a very specific reason, which is that in my family, one of my children was having a lot of problems with school, and that was leading to some sort of pretty significant mental health impacts. And so I needed to take some time out to help him out. And there is an amazing charity that is a peer support organization for folks who have got kids who are struggling with school, because it's a pretty traumatic experience for the kids and the parents alike. I know it's a big issue over in the UK and other places as well. And connecting with that organization was so transformative for me in terms of the support and the insight that it provided. I thought, I have a little bit of time on my hands now.
Yeah.
I want to be doing something, productive with my time as well. Not that looking after my son isn't productive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, actually, a friend of mine from Atlassian said, you should make a podcast about your experiences. And I was like, ugh. But then at one point, I'm just like, you know what? I should make a podcast for this organization, because they're helping them connect with more people is such a powerful thing to do. And so that's what I did. I hit them up and said, let's make a podcast. And they're like, who will we get to do that? And I'm like, I think I can do it. Frantically Googling to try and work out how on earth you do it. So I have a podcast that I've been doing for about 1.5 years now called The School Can't Experience.
School Can't Experience.
Yeah. And it's a mixture of lived experience interviews with families who have been through it and come to the other side, and then also interviews with experts, education experts, psychologists, or all kinds of folk who support families through this experience and who understand that it is a nervous system issue and not a behavioral issue, which is like the real turning point of insight that changes everything.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to put a link to the website because I've been on it, and also a link to it on Apple for people who are listening. Like, want to see and listen to Leisa interview these people. Like, we did have a big conversation on ARC, which we could probably plan for another conversation if you're interested, on how research and podcasting. We both agree on this, that it's an incredible cross-functioning discipline, if you want. Like, that you can actually use podcasting as a really nice way of designing in the open and being very transparent. And a lot of the skills that I learned through doing design research transfer into doing podcasting, and I think you're feeling the same thing as well. You see the parallels.
100%. The other thing, like, I used to always love the way that you would learn so much about the world through research and learn so much about other people and other people's lives through research. And through podcasting, I now have like a good excuse to message all these people who I just want to like talk to and learn from.
Yeah.
And go, hey, will you come and talk to me? And, and I like, otherwise they would just say no. But like, because you've got a microphone and a podcast, amazing people say yes to come have a conversation with you. And so that's such a treat.
It is amazing. Like, as a thing, I remember like way back in Australia, someone saying to me like, oh, you'll open the doors. And again, I'm not a big fan of Tim Ferriss, but he says that in one of his books, like the ability to be able to speak to CEOs in his life. He said, feels like he's had about 10 MBAs. And I was like, wow, that could be kind of cool from a design perspective. I could get inside the heads of a lot of people and understand how they work and think. So yeah, it's a huge privilege to be able to interview people like yourself and understand their own perspectives and how they reflect on how they worked and operated and scale things. So I wrap every episode on This Is HCD up with Leisa by saying thank you for coming on today, talking to me, allowing me to go left and right and have these conversations, because we don't run on a script. I've got a Mac here in front of me where I'm looking at some ideas for conversations, and you've helped me fill in those gaps 100 times better than I could have ever done in a script. So again, that takes a certain level of vulnerability and trust, and I appreciate you giving me that time and giving me this opportunity to speak to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And sorry to everyone else who I've accidentally pissed off when I've talked about these things along the way. My apologies.
No, we're all big boys and big girls and everything else in between. So thank you so much. And I'll chat to you.
Thank you, Gerry. I appreciate it. Great to talk.